Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end. My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer.
On the surface, Bright Falls is a sleepy, Pacific Northwest town. The kind of place you'd expect to see on a postcard. But underneath the lakeside charm lies something ancient, something twisted. Bright Falls isn't just the setting for Alan Wake, it's a Stephen King town in disguise. Today, we're peeling back the layers of Bright Falls, comparing it to the haunted folklore and small-town mythos of Stephen King's work. Because you know the signs, you'll see Bright Falls for what it really is. This isn't that lackluster Lovecraft country. This is Stephen King country. Even though you know horrible things are about to happen to Alan Wake, the first introduction to the town makes you fall in love with it. Bright Falls is charming, alive with that moody Pacific Northwest vibe. And that's no accident. Remedy's dev team actually traveled over 2,000 miles across the United States to document small towns, take photos, and absorb the atmosphere, all to make their creation more authentic. The result is a community that feels lived in, though it's not as bustling as I personally would have liked. Beautiful forest outskirts, a close-knit population, and a history the townsfolk quietly push aside. They're tight-lipped about their troubles, keeping what they've seen, heard, and experienced to themselves. But they survive them together. The town itself is a character just as much as Alan is, and in some ways even more so. And we know another writer who does the same things with his settings, Stephen King. Sure, he's known for monsters, but his towns are alive. They breathe. They remember. Two of his most famous small towns immediately come to mind: Derry and Castle Rock. Derry looks like any other small New England town. Quiet, cozy, almost picturesque. But beneath the tree-lined streets is something ancient, something hungry. Every 27 years, the town feeds. Murders, disappearances, disasters, and then, like clockwork, everyone just forgets. That willful blindness is Derry's true horror. The people enable the cycle by pretending it isn't there. Derry isn't just a backdrop. It's just as much of a villain as Pennywise in some ways. Castle Rock, on the other hand, is more like a crossroads of horror. In some ways it reminds me of the intro to the Books of Blood by Clive Barker. It's not cursed by an ancient town or haunted by a lake spirit. It's cursed by itself. There is something about this town that makes it a nexus for trouble and death. Rabid dogs, murderous children, sinister shopkeepers selling cursed objects. It feels almost ordinary, and that's what makes it terrifying. Evil in Castle Rock is as mundane as it is supernatural. King has returned to Castle Rock again and again. The Dead Zone, Cujo, Dark Half, Needful Things, Lacey's Story, Elevation, The Body, Uncle Otto's Truck, and the Sundog. Whether it's the center of the story or just a reference, Castle Rock embodies the same truth Remedy captured with Bright Falls. Sometimes the town itself is the villain. Alan Wake is a best-selling crime novelist in freefall, trapped in writer's block, desperate for inspiration, and his inability to progress further is afflicting his life. Him and his wife Alice retreat to Bright Falls. Alice is hoping this is the trip that would be able to help his situation, but soon after they arrive, Alice disappears at Cauldron Lake in the darkness, which just feeds her fears. Alan wakes up a week later with no memory of what happened. He searches for her and finds scattered pages of a manuscript he doesn't remember writing. Those pages are coming true, each one offering insight to the situation or things that may be just around the corner. The town is overrun by the Taken, shadowy figures controlled by a malevolent force known as the Dark Presence. To survive, Alan has to wield light like a weapon and piece together how his own words became the prison around him. Alan Wake is about a writer trapped inside his own story, doing his best to piece it together and find a way to save his wife. That concept comes straight from Stephen King. Remedy didn't just borrow King's tone, they pulled from the bones of three of his most writer-centric novels, intentional or not. Take the novel Bag of Bones. A grieving novelist retreats to his lakeside home only to find it haunted by old sins. The lake itself becomes a threshold for buried trauma. That's Cauldron Lake to the letter, a body of water that remembers every crime, every ghost, and refuses to let them rest. Then there's Misery. No supernatural monsters here, just a novelist held captive by his #1 fan, forced to write against his will. Paul Sheldon's creativity becomes his cage. That's Alan Wake's nightmare too. Not Alan Wake's American Nightmare, that's a different game. The Dark Presence plays the Annie Wilkes role, demanding more pages, more story, until the writer himself breaks. Thankfully, there's no hobbling scene in Alan Wake. And finally, the Dark Half. Thad Belmont's pseudonym, George Stark, literally comes to life. A murderous doppelganger born from his fiction and is the manifestation of his unborn twin brother. Kind of feels like Mr. Scratch. Alan suffers the same fate. His words bleed into reality. His creations walk the streets, and he can't help the monster his imagination is unleashing. Yet again, despite what happens to Alan, his fate seems to be better off than that of Thad's. He was mentioned in Needful Things and Bag of Bones, and it wasn't such a kind ending to a character who deserved better. Put them together and you get the DNA of Alan Wake. Bag of Bones gave it the haunted lake, Misery gave it its prison of forced creativity, and The Dark Half gave it the terror of a story breaking free. Remedy didn't just take inspiration from King, like I said, they built Bright Falls as if it was one of his cursed towns. When we talk about Bright Falls and Cauldron Lake, the word liminal comes up again and again. A liminal space is a threshold caught between two states of being, a halfway, a stairwell, a foggy road at night. These places feel eerie because they're just in between. Bright Falls is a liminal space by design. On the surface, it's a postcard town, fishing trips, festivals, diners, but there's always that feeling of something lurking underneath the surface, something that people won't talk about. It's suspended between the normal and the nightmarish. Cauldron Lake takes it further. It's not just a lake, it's a border. On one side, the ordinary world, beneath, the dark place where stories manifest into nightmares. The water is a thin veil between the two, a mirror of reality that hides another world below. Stand at its edge, and you literally become two realities. Stephen King mastered this technique. The Marston House in Salem's Lot isn't just a building, it's a magnet of evil, calling darkness to it. Derry is another, a town haunted for generations by Pennywise, where everyone ignores the horrors festering beneath. And then there's Haven from Tommyknockers, a town infected by alien influence, caught in its own cycle of corruption and denial. Remedy didn't just create a scary setting, they trapped it into the same folklore rhythm Stephen King uses. Towns as thresholds, places caught in endless cycles of denial, evil, and silence. Bright Falls doesn't feel invented, it feels remembered. There's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The enemies in Alan Wake are people. The Taken aren't zombies or demons or even psychic killers. They're townsfolk possessed by the dark presence. They're still more than humans. They still move like humans. They still react like humans. But their wills are gone. They've become hollowed out puppets. A level of empathy for them could be understandable because they never wished for this. King does this constantly. In Needful Things, the residents of Castle Rock are corrupted by their own desires. All it takes is one cursed trinket from Leland Gaunt's shop, and they're more than willing to do what the man asks, regardless of what the outcome may be. Or take Storm of the Century. Andre Lenoge arrives with a chilling message. Give me what I want and I'll go away. He manipulates people into unspeakable acts, turning them into vessels of his will while he waits in a county jail, only making him seem more powerful. Even the Dead Zone plays with this theme. Johnny Smith, the most original name ever, isn't possessed by evil, but by a purpose he can't escape. Having psychic visions that haunt the man of upcoming catastrophic events, he spirals towards what he knows will be his demise. Again and again, King shows us the same truth. Evil thrives through people, though a lot of the times it's exacerbated by some other force. Ordinary folk are pushed tempted and consumed until they become its instruments and doing things so out of character they are barely recognizable as that same character. It's exactly what happens in Bright Falls. The dark presence doesn't destroy the town, it uses it. Bright Falls and Cauldron Lake aren't just settings. They sit in that strange, unsettling place that we discussed earlier. A liminal space. A place that feels familiar but not quite real, like walking through a dream or a memory you can't trust. Cauldron Lake is that perfect example. It's not just water, it's the mirror, a surface where imagination takes shape and myth writes itself into the world. For Alan, that's not a metaphor. His words literally bleed into reality once they have been influenced. There's a deeper weight here. Stories, the ones we tell ourselves, the ones passed down through generations, eventually transform into memory. And once they're memories, they become truth. There's nothing I like more than sitting down with my father and his business partner when they start talking about my family's lore. Hell, even the stories about the job sites they've worked are kind of magical in their own way. We'll leave it at that. That's Bright Falls. Nobody remembers when the strangeness began. It just has always been there, woven into the history, whispered about but never explained. That's a real horror. The town feels ordinary, almost too ordinary, but underneath it carries the weight of something older. It's like revisiting a childhood place. The streets are the same, the buildings are the same, but the silence is off. The angles just kind of feel wrong. You can't tell if you're remembering it as it was or as you imagined it to be. It's Bright Falls. Alan himself is caught in that cycle. His work is no longer just fiction, it's myth in motion, shaping memory for himself and everyone around him. And once a story becomes memory, you can't separate the two. Alan Wake the man dissolves into Alan Wake the myth. It's yet another thing that makes Bright Falls terrifying, not because it's unnatural, but because it feels too natural. A place where stories don't stay on the page, and where the lines between what's written and what's remembered, and even what's lived, has completely eroded. That liminal space is where the dark presence thrives, between myth and memory, between past and present, between what we know and what we only think we know. Whether it's in the pages of a King novel or the misty forests of Bright Falls, horror thrives in the spaces between story and memory. Alan Wake may not carry King's name, but it's written in his shadow. It's like Lovecraft and Stasis Bone Totem. The spirit is present. Did Bright Falls capture that Stephen King vibe for you like it did me? Let me know in the comments down below. And remember, stay scared, stay curious.